The live stream is about to start. My goal here is to improve your health and wellness through a healthy diet, natural remedies, and other solutions that we'll talk about. Please put a Q or a question mark in front of any questions you might have. Sit back and enjoy. Good Thursday evening. Hope everybody is doing great out there today. I'm going to pull up some comments. I see Ginger Sterling Spies just became a member, so thank you so much. And guys, y'all, I am so excited tonight that I've got Dr. William Davis, #1 New York Times bestselling author of Wheat Belly, and right now on Amazon, #1 in other health for the book Super Gut, which is what I've been talking about over the last few weeks. So I'm going to bring him in now, and I am excited for this. I hope y'all are too. So, hey, Dr. Davis, thank you so much for being here with me tonight. Yeah, well, I appreciate it. So I had one question I had for you, because I know you're not exactly taking what you learned in medical school and teaching that to everybody. What got you interested in the gut as far as health goes? Because you're a cardiologist, right?
Managing in another city. Well, it illustrated just how awful, how inadequate the conventional approach to heart disease was. So I looked for better ways to manage heart disease. Back then, 30 some years ago, it remains largely true today. The best way to gauge your risk, by the way, it's not cholesterol. Cholesterol should have been discarded decades ago as an outdated, virtually useless measure. LDL cholesterol, total cholesterol, all that nonsense. But it makes pharmaceutical industry a lot of money, so it persists. Even to this day, most of my colleagues have been miserably brainwashed into believing that cholesterol is the cause of heart disease. It is not. It is a crude, indirect biomarker for the actual particles and factors in the bloodstream that do cause heart disease. But anyway, so back then, I helped establish a CT heart scan. This is common now, but 30 years ago it was not. It was very new. This was one of the first scanners in the entire Midwest, one of the first scanners in the country. And we scanned people looking for hidden heart disease. This is people like you and me, Victor. People going to work, going to school, riding their bike, going for walks, exercising, not having chest pain. These are not people in emergency rooms. These are people going about their lives. And we're looking for hidden heart disease. When you look for it, you find it. What do you do about it? Well, back then, we helped publish these studies. If we follow conventional thinking and put you on a high dose of Lipitor and a baby aspirin and a low-fat, low-saturated fat, low-cholesterol diet, exercise program, all this familiar stuff everybody knows about, it does nothing to stop the progression of heart disease. If you did nothing, heart disease progresses. Plaque grows at about a rate of 25% per year. On Lipitor, baby aspirin, low-fat diet, etc., it grows 25% per year. Well, what do you do with all the people, everyday people freaking out who have progression of their heart disease by CT heart scans? So it took some years of zigzagging, trial and error to try to figure this out, but it did lead to a set of strategies that put a stop to the progression of heart disease. It involves such things as you know about omega-3 fatty acids. Vitamin D was a big change. It was the first time we saw coronary atherosclerosis reverse. But it also became clear there was something missing. Victor, there was something missing. And I asked the question whether it was some disruption of the microbiome. When I opened that door, I was shocked at the flood of insight into human health that emerged. That insight into the microbiome tells us it's a major player in multiple diseases, including coronary disease, but in a lot of ways that I did not expect. So one of the most prominent ways that the microbiome plays a role in heart disease is that because of our modern overexposure to things like antibiotics, glyphosate, other herbicides, pesticides, food additive, all the things that we're exposed to, there have been multiple beneficial species have been killed off in the gastrointestinal tract. When you lose those beneficial species, it allows the overproliferation of fecal microbes. These are microbes that are supposed to stay in the colon, like E. coli, Salmonella, Campylobacter, Pseudomonas, fecal microbes. They overproliferate and then ascend into the 24 feet of small intestine. This is called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO, SIBO, we say. I thought that was rare, Victor, until we started looking for it, and we started to see it is probably the world's worst epidemic of our species, that even conservatively estimated half the US population has SIBO. Now, what is that an implication? How does that impact health? Well, the colon is accustomed to these fecal microbes. Small intestine is not. It's not well equipped. It has a much thinner protective mucus barrier, for instance. It's meant to be permeable because that's where we absorb nutrients, like amino acids, fatty acids, vitamins, minerals. But when fecal microbes invade the small intestine, they live and die very rapidly. They don't live for a few hours. When they die, they shed their toxic components, such as something called endotoxin, into the intestines and then into the bloodstream. That's called endotoxemia. And when endotoxin gains entry to the bloodstream, it raises blood pressure, it raises blood sugar, it causes expansion of abdominal fat, it causes inflammation, it inflames your joints, it inflames your brain, it inflames your skin as rosacea or psoriasis, it causes fibromyalgia, causes restless leg syndrome. In other words, so many of the modern conditions we're all familiar with, driven by fecal microbes invading the small intestine and then endotoxemia being exported to various organs.
Oh yeah. Well, and like the mucosal barrier, I know you were talking about the various things with the mucus barrier, um, and obviously in your book you talk about that. Um, but so from what you're saying, if now what feeds the good microbiome and or the good microbes? I mean, how do they survive? I've done the El Rurai yogurt video. I got the SIBO one coming up to show people that, and I've been in the middle of a series talking about your 4-week program. So, what's the first? What's the most important thing to have to feed the good gut microbiome?
I know this is a special interest of yours. It's very, very important.
It
It's
is.
fibers. It's mostly plant fibers. There are some, surprisingly, animal fibers as well, but it's mostly plant fibers, so-called prebiotic fibers and some other related compounds. These come from such things as jicama or asparagus or Brussels sprouts or root vegetables, um, legumes like black beans, white beans, kidney beans. These are foods that nourish microbes and cause proliferation of beneficial species with crazy names. I don't make up these names, Victor, so I'm sorry.
They do, don't they?
Species like Akkermansia or Faecalibacterium or Ruminicaceae or Lactospiraceae. These are very important microbes, as well as Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterial species that you've been cultivating. Those beneficial species do all kinds of incredible things for the human host, but we've lost them. And so even if you feed them, the situation when you've disrupted your microbiome, whether it's confined to the colon or involved the small intestine, SIBO, and you haven't corrected that situation and you ingest those fibers, you may nourish the unhealthy species, those fecal microbes. That's why people say things like this: well, I tried those fibers and it gave me gas and bloating and diarrhea. Or I'm trying to get those things, or I can't eat asparagus, or I can't eat nightshades, or I can't eat this or that food because it gives me bloating, diarrhea, etc. Well, that's because you have fecal microbes getting first dibs on those fibers as opposed to the healthy microbes. So the first step is to push back or reduce the population of those invading fecal microbes, allow the proliferation or restoration of beneficial microbes like lactobacillus and other species, and then you can tolerate those fibers and they do good things for you.
Gotcha. So if you've eliminated pretty much all the fibers from the diet, you may have some issues. I've seen a lot of things after reading your book, especially a few times. I go into some groups and things, and people have eliminated basically all fiber. Fiber is not necessary, all these things. But then I see these problems and all these questions of why is this happening or why is that happening? And could you speak on that just a little bit as far as like a super, and I recommend, like, I saw your interview with Dr. Berg, and I kind of am along those same lines of lower carb, no grains, no oats, things like that, but good leafy greens, non-starchy vegetables, things like that. Could you speak on that just a little bit, on your thoughts on eliminating all that?
So imagine you're a mean guy and you have a nice dog and you tie it up in your backyard and you leave town for a couple of weeks and you forget to feed it and it's on a chain. What's going to happen to your poor dog? It's going to be dead, right? So if you don't feed creatures, they die, or at least they become very weak and diminish in numbers. And so when you don't feed microbes, bad things happen. So among the things that occurs when you deprive yourself of fibers, you might call it a carnivorous diet, you might call it a ketogenic diet, or an excessively strict ketogenic diet. Not all people on these diets do this, but many do. So if you deprive yourself of those fibers that nourish microbes, weird stuff happens. One of the things that happens is Akkermansia overproliferation. So Akkermansia is a beneficial microbe under normal conditions. If Akkermansia comprises about 5% of all microbes in your gastrointestinal tract, it's a good situation. Helps you control weight and blood sugar and blood pressure and mood. It's a very beneficial microbe. If you feed it fibers, if you deprive it of fibers, it does something very strange. It has the added capacity to consume human mucus. Its full name is Akkermansia muciniphila, mucus lover. So it loves human mucus. So when you fail to feed it fibers, it turns a human mucus lining your intestines, and it causes intestinal inflammation. You can actually get ulcerative colitis from this, and increases that endotoxemia, the entry of bacterial breakdown products. And that leads to things like drop in HDL, rise in triglycerides, increased risk for heart disease, inflammation body-wide, higher blood pressure, weight gain in the abdomen. So that's the Akkermansia overproliferation effect. There also is an overproliferation of sulfur, a hydrogen sulfide producing species like D-sulfovibrio or bilophila. So when you feed it too much, a lot of meat, but no fibers, you get an overproliferation of hydrogen sulfide producing species that are known to be colon cancer causing species. That's among the things that can happen when you fail to feed. The ironic thing, Victor, is the ketogenic diet is the only diet for which we have a century of evidence, because it was used going back to the 1920s to treat children with intractable grand mal seizures. And it was found out that you put these children on a very strict ketogenic diet, no carbs, no fibers, the severity and the frequency of seizures, because these kids were having seizures so frequently it causes brain damage and unresponsive to drugs and even surgery often. So you put this child on a ketogenic diet, it reduces frequency by about 50%. Occasionally curative, but often just a reduction in frequency. But what happens to those kids? They stop growing. They develop kidney stones. These are children. They develop osteoporosis. They have distortions of their bowel flora, like overproliferation of Akkermansia and overproliferation of cancer-causing microbes. In other words, we've known for a century there were problems. Now, a lot of those problems were blamed on the fact that in the early days, the oil used was corn oil. And we all know corn oil is a horrible oil.
Mm-hmm.
The more modern versions, corn oil has been replaced by coconut oil, other sources of saturated fat, medium chain triglycerides, and others. But we're still seeing the same thing happen, that bad things happen to metabolism when you deprive your microbiome of fibers.
Gotcha. So I know, and obviously, I've read through your book, and I've got people asking me questions about, well, hey, if I'm doing keto, I'm doing low carb. I know you suggest like the green bananas. I've seen the green banana powder. Um, things like the raw white potatoes. Is that something you think we could give up and do something different, or is that something you think is essential for the microbiome?
Those are just convenient sources. It doesn't have to be those. You can do those, but just be careful with the green banana powder because the temperature typically used to dehydrate the bananas is 140 degrees Fahrenheit. We ran an analysis of green banana powder and it's 50% sugar, meaning about 50% of the fibers from a green banana are converted to sugars, and so it becomes too sugary. But the
Hmm.
green banana itself is almost pure fiber, so that's okay. But it doesn't have to be those things. It could be root vegetables, it could be dandelion greens, could be leeks, could be garlic, shallots, onions. It could be commercial powders for convenience. Inulin is very popular. Inulin or fructooligosaccharides powders are very popular. And key is variety, because a variety of different microbes consume different fibers. And so the key is to include a variety of fibers, but not to neglect them because they are essential for microbial metabolism.
Yep. Good, good. So Dustin asked, are there any low or zero carb fibers?
There are. So a green unripe banana is zero. It's pure carb. That's the problem. Fibers are carbs. Carbs are fibers. So that's a quirk of the nutritional analysis. Sugars are also carbs. So let's take a 7-inch, medium-sized green unripe banana. 27 grams total carbs. Of those carbs, 24 grams are fiber. 3 grams are sugar. If you let it ripen, it's 27 grams of sugar. Well, it's more like 24 grams of sugar, 3 grams fiber. It flip flops.
Right, right.
So there are many. Inulin powder, essentially, it's all fiber. But remember, fibers are carbs, carbs are fiber. So you really can't separate the two. The thing you're worried about is sugar, not the carbs. It's sugar. Uh, Sugar is a carb, carb is a sugar. So it's very confusing, and it has to do with the biochemistry. But you can, uh, but I would not. So one of the things that I tell people is in my programs, we're not purposely ketotic. You can be ketotic. Ketosis itself is not harmful. There may even be benefits. As you know, you can bypass the need for glucose in someone's brain with cognitive impairment because there's insulin resistance. And insulin resistance in the brain is different than insulin resistance in the pancreas, muscle, and elsewhere because insulin resistance in the brain means glucose can't enter. And so if you give a person with dementia medium chain triglycerides or coconut oil, they actually have an improvement in mental capacity because you're providing an alternative source that bypasses the blocked blood-brain barrier. Um, but the point is that it's not always a good idea to be zero carb because you really need the carbs from fiber,
Mhm.
not the sugars from carbs, if that makes sense.
It does, absolutely. That's again, when I get back to the thing of someone having problems, I'm always like, hey, add some salad in, add some non-starchy vegetables in, and see if it doesn't get better. And in a lot of cases, like even breaking a stall, some people are on keto or try to be in ketosis for a year and can't lose weight if that's the goal or whatever the case is. They add a little salad in, add a little bit of non-starchy vegetable in, fix the gut. Things get better. Um,
Victor, this was a lesson we had to relearn because going back 40 years, the Atkins diet,
mhm.
Dr. Robert Atkins advocated essentially a zero carb diet, at least initially. And people saw spectacular benefits, all the kind of benefits you guys are seeing. Weight loss, drop in triglycerides, rise in HDL, drop in small LDL, drop in blood pressure, loss of abdominal visceral fat. So people say, this is fantastic, right? But then about 18 months, 24 months typically into the diet, they say, my triglycerides are creeping up. I'm regaining weight. I'm constipated. My HDL has dropped. My blood glucose going back up. And people say, well, you're not doing the diet. But I say, I am doing the diet. That's from the dysbiosis that was caused by the failure to feed microbes.
Right. I mean, kind of the same thing as following the old food pyramid. It's supposed to be the best thing for you, and the health conditions get worse. The whole 9 yards there. Um, but got another question for you here. Is there a better time of day to eat the L-reuteri, and also with or without other foods?
Some people get sleepy with it, occasional. So some people like to eat it, say, with dinner or after dinner. But if you don't get that effect, eat it any old time. So microbes like Lactobacillus reuteri are not drugs. They take up residence in your gastrointestinal tract, though we don't know why it doesn't take up permanent residence. If your mom gave you Lactobacillus reuteri when you were born, like passes through the birth canal or breastfeeding, you'd have reuteri for a lifetime if you were never exposed to antibiotics and other factors. But if you get reuteri through yogurt or a probiotic, it persists maybe a few days, a week maybe. Why? Well, no one knows for a fact, but it's probably lack of its community. In other words, microbes are like humans. We have partners, families, neighbors, co-workers, people in our community. Microbes are the same way. We don't yet know what the community of Lactobacillus reuteri is. Maybe in future I'll say, Victor, okay, we figured it out. If you want reuteri to take up permanent residence, take it for whatever, a week or 2 weeks with these 7 other microbes, something like that. But right now we don't know what that looks like.
Gotcha. And I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, who hasn't been without antibiotics? When I was a kid, I mean, I'd go to the doctor, and that was always the end of the conversation was, oh, well, get an injection ready, and there you go. And no matter what it was, the best thing that came out of that, I'd get some ginger ale on the way home, because he's like, drink some ginger ale, give him plenty of Sprite or whatever. I mean, that was so that made it a little worse, right?
It was a dark age, wasn't it, of health care, and nutrition. Victor, if the USDA and other agencies got it right, and we're all enjoying spectacular health, there'd be no need to have these conversations. There wouldn't be all this uncertainty about ketogenic, carnivorous, vegetarian, vegan, all that kind of stuff. We'd all understand that they got it, but they didn't get it right. In fact, they got it so wrong. They got it so colossally wrong with such bad science that persists to this day. The scientists and researchers who generated that sloppy, awful data showing such things as low-fat diets are good for you, when you build a career on it, when you build your reputation on it, you'll defend it to the death. And so we have people who need to, we need new generations of people to embrace new ideas like you and your listeners are.
Well, we definitely appreciate it. Yeah, I'm open-minded. Hey, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, But I always try to follow the science, what's current, and I try to keep up with it so I can pass along the best information, as I know you do. And this is a good question here. Can I raise my HDL and lower my triglycerides?
Yeah, and it's easy. So personally, for instance, 30 years ago, this is how old this goes back, yet it has not fully permeated through the public. So my triglycerides are 390 milligrams per deciliter. My HDL is 27. And it's a high risk pattern for heart disease because I was a low fat vegetarian, 10% of calories from fat, and I ate no meat, added no oils, only ate vegetables, fruits, and whole grains. And I became a metabolic mess. I became a type 2 diabetic. I was hypertensive. The low HDL, high triglycerides, small LDL particles went sky high. Well, I realized that doing the wrong diet, a low-fat vegan or vegetarian diet, was a metabolic disaster. So I stopped doing it, became non-diabetic, undid, and learned a bunch of new lessons over time. Now my triglycerides are typically 47. My HDL is 94, last I checked. And I've done this now hundreds of times. It's very easy. If you reject this idea of cut your fat, cut your saturated fat, cut your cholesterol, eat more healthy whole grains, and everything in moderation, that's a death sentence. That is flawed science. A lot of this science, Victor, came from efforts like this. I say, Victor, what did you eat for breakfast on Monday? You say, I had a bowl of oatmeal with skim milk and a banana. What'd you have for lunch? I'm making
No, I understand. Yeah. Hey, that's typical.
What'd you have for lunch? Well, I was at work, so I had a ham sandwich on rye with cheese and mayonnaise and a 6-ounce cup of low-fat yogurt. What'd you have for dinner? We do that over 5 days. A 5-day dietary questionnaire. I contact you in 10 years and say, Victor, what's become of you? Have you had colon cancer or heart disease or dementia? Now, in those 10 years, what happened to you? You got divorced. You went binge drinking. You did a cleanse. You had an all inclusive vacation in Mexico. You had a car accident, had a neck injury, took opioids, had to go through detox. In other words, life has all its crazy ups and downs, yet you're going to predict what works for diet from a 5-day. What are you joking? This is the basis for dietary guidelines. This is how the Harvard School of Public Health conducted all those studies, the nurses' health study, physicians' health study, all that crap data. And it became embraced by the USDA, US Department of Health and Human Services, as fact, even though it's nothing better than science fiction.
Right. That's a great point. It's like, and they take the last 2 years and, hey, what'd you eat in the last 2 years? I mean, I can't remember 2 days ago. So 2 years ago, that takes some doing. But so what's a typical day look like for you as far as what you eat in a day?
Things you'd be familiar with: eggs, avocados, meat. I'll do a lot of stir fries with onions and garlic and shallots and green leafy vegetables, as you point out, and eating to satiety. Never counting calories, never limiting fat, never limiting protein, but eating when you're hungry. And you may have noticed, Victor, that the whole feeling of hunger on these lifestyles is very different. Grain consuming and sugar consuming people have this insatiable around the clock hunger they can't control. That's why people have to use all these strategies, smartphone apps. You're stress eating, or distract themselves. Well, that's not natural. When you get rid of the grains, wheat, and sugar, you change your physiology. One of the things that happens is there's a protein in wheat and grains called gliadin. And gliadin, because grains were not meant to be consumed by humans, we don't have the digestive enzymes. What that means is when you consume the gliadin protein in wheat, people call it gluten, but gliadin is the actual active component in gluten. That gliadin protein, we don't have digestive enzymes to break down. So if you ate an egg or a piece of beef, you would break those proteins into single amino acids. And that's how you convert those proteins into skin, muscle, bone, etc. When you consume the gliadin protein of wheat and related proteins in other grains, like the secalin in rye, the hordein in barley, the zein in corn, we can't digest it fully. And they're broken down into 4 or 5 amino acid long peptides that are able to enter the brain and bind to the opioid receptors, where they act as appetite stimulants. And that's why people who include grains in their diet have insatiable hunger. These are the people who will shove you out of the way at the all-you-can-eat food buffet, or get mad at the waiter or waitress because their food took more than 10 minutes to deliver after their order, or eat a big bowl of pasta. They're filled to bursting, but they're still oddly hungry. Very perverse, very unnatural. Those are all driven by gliadin-derived opioid peptides. When you get rid of wheat and grains, you become oddly freed. And if you don't restrict fats and oils, which are satiating, you even get further into not having to give in to impulse and appetite.
Yeah, I mean they're hangry. I mean that used to be every morning I would do oatmeal first thing. Hour and a half later, I was starving. I mean, it was hour and a half till lunchtime. So grab a snack. Then the cycle just keeps continuing. That's how I got in the worst shape I was ever in. And I mean, it's just, and there's a lot of people in that boat, and that's why I'm trying to spread the word about this, and you are too. And let's say your book was eye opening to me. So my background, I've studied herbalism for a long time, and we back 20 years ago we're talking about mostly fungal conditions, candida cleanses, things like that. Never got into the bacteria, in the gut microbiome as much, other than the cleanses and things like that. And so, I read that. I'm like, man, that's the missing piece. So, I really do appreciate all the work you've done on it. And I love the book and the program. So programs helped me for sure.
You do
Um,
raise a very important issue, and that is fungal overgrowth. That's a real thing also, because it's fed by a number of things, but largely the loss of those beneficial bacteria, which are suppressive over fungal overgrowth. That's one factor. Another is the overproliferation of carbs and sugars in the diet. And fungi love carbs and sugars. That's why people with diabetes, type 1 or type 2, they don't just have high blood glucose, they also have high skin glucose, high mouth glucose, high vagina glucose, high prostate glucose, high gastrointestinal glucose. And so they're walking petri dishes for fungal overgrowth. So if you ever talk to a type 2 diabetic, especially one who's under poor control, having blood glucose in the 300, 400 range, they have all kinds of fungal infestations. It's very common for them to have oral fungal infections behind the ear, around the eyebrows, scalp, under the arms, under the breast, groin, toenail, fingernail, as well as brain and gastrointestinal tract. They're hotbeds for fungal overgrowth.
yeah, the things you can't see, but they're there. Let's see. Let's see, Dr. Davis. I followed your wheat belly diet for years, then went strict keto. Where can I find the perfect plan or regimen diet I can follow? I lost all the weight except for 10 pounds, but lost so much muscle.
So think of super gut as kind of the next stage. A lot of the same principles of wheat belly apply. No wheat grains, sugars, vitamin D, magnesium, omega-3 fatty acids, iodine. A lot of those basic things still apply. But we've taken a leap forward in the microbiome strategies. So one of the things, as Victor has pointed out, is this formulation I call SIBO yogurt. And all it is a combination of three microbes: Lactobacillus reuteri, Lactobacillus gasseri, and the original recipe was Bacillus coagulans was the third microbe. We've since switched to Bacillus subtilis. These are three microbes, largely lost from the modern gastrointestinal tract, or diminished at least, that when restored do two very important things. They colonize the small intestine, where SIBO occurs, as well as the colon, and produce what are called bacteriocins. These are natural antibiotics, effective in killing those fecal microbes. So I did this originally, I formulated this originally just to provide some relief to people. It turned out to be spectacularly effective in normalizing breath hydrogen gas. That's how you measure SIBO. You don't have to do that, but it's one way to gauge whether you have SIBO or not. Some people do this with a consumer device. There's two of them. This is the
Beach to it.
original. Yes, exactly. Uh-huh. So you blow into it, talks to your smartphone, 0 to 10, how much hydrogen gas you're producing, because microbes produce hydrogen gas, but humans do not. And you can use it as a mapping device. Please don't hear that you have to get this AIRE device, AIRE, but it's one of the options people have. But we've since normalized about 90% of people who consume the SIBO yogurt for 4 weeks or longer. They've normalized their H2 gas. The one tricky thing about this is reuteri, Lactobacillus reuteri, the first microbe in SIBO yogurt, also produces hydrogen gas. So if you use the AIRE device to see whether you remain, if you're positive at the start, consume SIBO yogurt, you want to retest, you have to stop the reuteri for a couple of weeks, or else it's going to make it look like it's positive, even when it's not. So a little tricky. But people can use other signs. If you have a food intolerance, for instance, people have tons of food intolerances, right? I can't eat nightshades. I have histamine. I have a histamine intolerance. I can't eat legumes. I can't eat FODMAPs. All those things. Those are all variations of SIBO. And it's very common to do the SIBO yogurt 4 weeks, sometimes longer if you have SIBO really bad. And you say, I can eat anything now, and it doesn't bother me anymore. The food intolerance goes away, or the fat malabsorption, fatty stools, goes away, or the fibromyalgia pain goes away, or the restless legs goes away. In other words, it really helps if you have some sign you can follow to know that your SIBO has responded.
Perfect, perfect. And that's one thing I wanted to ask too. A lot of people have asked me, well, I can't do dairy at all. What can I do instead of the SIBO yogurt?
So you can do it in coconut milk. The recipe is a little bit different because coconut milk likes to separate. So we take a couple of steps to prevent separation. We add a little guar gum, for instance, which is just a fiber. And we also use a stick blender before adding the microbes. So that recipe is in my Super Gut book. It's also in my WilliamDavisMD.com blog. But it's basically preheat coconut milk 180 degrees, let it cool, add the guar gum, about a teaspoon to a 13.5 ounce can, hit it with a stick blender until it's thick, take about a minute or two, then add the microbe. You can add the fiber then too, and then ferment. It also helps maybe to add a little sugar because there's no lactose in coconut milk. But one thing to know about using dairy. So dairy has problems, no question. But this method I've been advocating of prolonged fermentation. So conventional yogurt made with other microbes, we're using human microbes. They're using other microbes. When you use these human microbes and you let them ferment, not for 6 hours or 12 hours like they do in factories, we're going to ferment for 36 hours. So Lactobacillus reuteri, for instance, doubles. They don't have sex, right? They just double themselves. Doubles every 3 hours at human body temperature. So we're going to let it double 12 times, 36 hours. And when we count the number of microbes, we get about 300 billion per half cup serving. Now, when you do that, you've exhausted the lactose. So there's virtually no lactose remaining. So most people who are lactose intolerant can do just fine on the yogurt. And because you're getting a lot of lactic acid, it is tart, but that degree of acidity, that lactic acid acidifies the yogurt to a pH of 3.5, tenfold more acidic than conventional yogurt at 4.6. It's a logarithmic scale. So that degree of acidification denatures or breaks down the casein beta A1 form of casein that occurs in North American dairy. It makes it less immunogenic, less likely to cause immune responses. And so we haven't eliminated the issues with dairy. There's some hormones and other things, but you've minimized the problems with dairy. So a lot of people who were intolerant to dairy can do the yogurt with this extended fermentation method.
Would A2 help?
A2 can help if the problem is the casein.
Okay, perfect. This is a great question here. Will my homemade vanilla extract kill the yogurt? I use 151 Everclear and cut it to 100 with distilled water. I use a lot of it, about 2 teaspoons in a cup of yogurt. Would that be defeating the purpose?
Probably not. Many microbes are fairly tolerant to ethanol. A lot of microbes produce some ethanol. So if you make, for instance, we have this thing called Saccharomyces boulardii sparkling juice fermented with this fungal species, Saccharomyces boulardii. And if you let it ferment too long, it makes plenty of alcohol. You can actually make wine that way. So probably not. So I tell people, don't make this harder than it is. People agonize over some of the details. There is some need to pay attention to details. Some people who are a little sloppy with their utensils, for instance, or where air conditioner heater vents are, you can get contamination. But for the most part, it's a pretty easy process.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I'm glad you said that because I made a strawberry version in my video and I used some strawberry extract. So I'm glad you said that. I don't have to redo it. I think it was fine. I don't use quite that much either. But you said something about changing the third part of the SIBO yogurt. Why? What made the difference in that?
So I chose one of those spore-forming microbes because they germinate. They're spores. They're not microbes. They're spores. They germinate like a seed in the ileum typically. Well, we grew coagulans as yogurt individually and found that it was wildly variable. We didn't get consistent yields, wild variation in numbers. And so another reason is, so the two other microbes, Lactobacillus reuteri, Lactobacillus gasseri, produce these bacteriocins, natural antibiotics, but they're mostly effective in killing what are called gram-negative species. That describes how they stain under a microscope. Those are species like E. coli and Salmonella. The subtlest, I think, was a better choice in retrospect because it produces bacteriocins that are also effective in killing gram-positive species that have a different cell wall composition, stain differently. These are species like Staphylococcus, Streptococcus, and Enterococcus. So sometimes people have SIBO. They do a stool analysis, and there's too many Streptococcus and Enterococcus. Well, the reuteri and gasseri may not be all that effective for that kind of SIBO. So the subtlest it fills that gap. It's more
Uh,
effective. It's effective for the gram-positive species.
okay, great. Amy has a question. Should I take the L-reuteri capsules on an empty stomach?
Yeah, reuteri is so people say things like, "Oh, probiotics don't survive stomach acid." Well, that's true for some species, but not reuteri. Reuteri gasseri and Bacillus subtilis are incredibly have great survivability in stomach acid and in bile. That's why if you take it, you can recover high numbers in your stool. They survive. And so while some microbes die in stomach acid, those guys do not. So you can take it with food, you can take it without food, doesn't make any difference.
All right, let's see. My triglycerides have raised from 116 to 184. My HDL from 40 to 39. What could be going on since I've been keto since the beginning of January?
The most common reason would be you had an uptick in endotoxemia. That is, going keto has diminished beneficial microbes, has allowed overproliferation of unhealthy microbes, Akkermansia, Parabacteroides, desulfovibrio, and others that have now allowed toxic compounds to enter your bloodstream. Endotoxemia. Now, endotoxemia is a bad thing. It's an uber risk factor for cancer. It raises triglycerides, reduces HDL, provokes formation of small LDL, worsens insulin resistance, raises blood glucose, causes expansion of abdominal fat, heightens inflammation body-wide, including in your brain and heart. In other words, this is not a minor issue. This is a big issue. When you have endotoxemia, everything goes to shit. And it's caused by failure to get fibers. So that kind of distortion is typically what happens when you have dysbiosis and or SIBO caused by lack of fibers and thereby endotoxemia. So the key is, as Victor would tell you, add back those fibers.
Yep. And this and Sherry now, Sherry's been watching for a long time. She cannot do coconut. And do you know anything about coconut as far as, I mean, would this cause maybe a coconut allergy? Is that something that could happen? She was asking here, some psoriasis. What should I be eating? Currently off all meds for a year now, but it's slowly coming back. But I know she can't do coconut. But
So
I'm
if you have
wondering.
a sensitivity, you can ferment all kinds of things. I use dairy because it's so easy. It's such a forgiving vehicle for fermentation. Coconut milk's a pretty good one too. The other milks are not very good because they're too thin. But you can now here's a principle to bear in mind that helps guide you how to ferment things. There are microbes that ferment at human body temperature. That's what we're talking about. Reuteri, right? Gasseri. Then there are microbes that ferment at room temperature. Those are the microbes in fermented foods like kefir and kimchi and sauerkraut and fermented radishes and all that kind of stuff. Those are species like Leuconostoc or Pediococcus. These are room temperature fermenting microbes. So Reuteri is a human body temperature microbe. So you can ferment it in other things like hummus is one good one. Salsas are another and many other foods. But you're going to have to heat it to some degree. So you want to pick foods that aren't damaged or destroyed by heating. So salsa is fairly tolerant. Hummus is pretty tolerant. Heat it. You don't have to heat it all the way to 100 degrees. If you got to 90 or 95, you're doing pretty well.
How often are we supposed to eat the SIBO yogurt? Like once a quarter per year, twice a month, twice a year, monthly?
So the SIBO, I regret calling it SIBO yogurt. What it really should, what it should have been really called is reimplantation of Keystone microbial species yogurt. But no one wants to say that.
Not as good an acronym either. So,
So when you have SIBO, consume it for a minimum of 4 weeks. If you got it really bad, if you said, for instance, I took antibiotics for 7 years for acne or whatever reason, those people might have to do it for many months. But let's say you responded after 4 weeks and your food intolerances went away, for instance. I would continue to consume it several times a week, maybe 3 times a week or so, because SIBO loves to come back. And there are other benefits, spectacular benefits to those microbes, skin benefits, muscle benefits, mood, empathy, generosity, well being. So, in other words, it's not just eradicating SIBO, it's gaining all the benefits of restoring microbes that you have lost. And the species of SIBO yogurt also encourage the proliferation of other beneficial species. So it's kind of the first big step in rebuilding a healthy gastrointestinal microbiome.
And so once you've kind of gone through that, then you recommend just sticking with the Reuteri after that?
You could try just using Reuteri. That some people have done that successfully. This a lot of this, Victor, is a work in progress. We don't have all the answers, but this is certainly better than just taking an off-the-shelf probiotic. Your listeners may not be aware of this, but commercial probiotics are crafted this way. They say, okay, Lactococcus lactis seems like good, put it in there. Bifidobacteria infantis seems like good, throw it in there. They're haphazard concoctions with no thought to collaboration, for characteristics like small intestinal colonization or bacteriocin production, cooperative effects via metabolites. To truly craft an effective probiotic, you can't just slap together a bunch of microbes. You have to put them together intelligently. It's a work in progress. Almost nobody has done that. The only company I know that's done that is BiotiQuest, BiotiQuest, with my friends who started, Martha Carlin and Dr. Raul Cano. They used a modeling system to do that. To my knowledge, no one else has done that. So that'll come with the next generation of probiotics. They actually use science to craft better formulations. But right now, modern probiotics are kind of a sloppy, haphazard collection.
Let's see. Can I use heavy cream instead of half and half? It comes out thicker.
Sure. Yeah, it comes out like cream cheese, if you don't mind that.
Yeah.
Of course.
I think that'd be a little thick for me myself, but I've got some questions here that some people had from the last couple of weeks here. Let's see. I think you've answered how long can a person take SIBO yogurt. Good question here. I was wondering how long it takes to get your gut flora back to optimal after starting this program.
There's no single answer. There are people who enjoy spectacular effects after 4 weeks. There are people who are still working on it at 2 years. It really varies. So many people, I fear, Victor, have done so much damage to their intestinal barrier that it takes a long. These are the people, for instance, who have to get fecal transplants that are temporary and not always effective. But it is a proven strategy. But there's no one answer. If you took antibiotics for a long time, if you have Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, you might have to engage in these kinds of strategies for a lifetime. But most people, the majority, SIBO yogurt for 4 weeks every day, and then intermittently afterwards, accompanied by other strategies. So I should point that out also. So inclusion of fermented foods, kefirs, kimchi, sauerkrauts, fermented veggies, very easy to do, and almost without cost. That's very important. Inclusion of those fibers we talked about. A commercial probiotic, maybe, like the one I mentioned earlier. But most commercial products, they can be somewhat helpful, not as helpful as they should be. Future probiotics will be better. By the way, the interesting thing about fermented foods, so if you ate sauerkraut, let's just say, real sauerkraut, not the brine and salt, brine and vinegar stuff, but real fermented sauerkraut, which is very easy to make, by the way. It has microbes like Leuconostoc mesenteroides, or Pediococcus pentasaceus, or Pediococcus acidilactici, or Weisella species. I mention that because these are species, interestingly, Victor, that don't take up residence in the human GI tract. You ingest them, they pass through, and you poop them out. So what good are they? Well, that's the interesting thing. In their passage from mouth to toilet, they somehow cultivate the proliferation of those other beneficial species, the Akkermansias, the Fecalibacter, Lactobacillus species. So it's not clear how they do that, but they somehow cultivate. So one of the most powerful things to do long term is the inclusion of several servings of fermented foods every day.
Isn't that the same with curcumin? I mean, it's only absorbed about, well, the pure curcumin without the black pepper or anything like that, it's only absorbed like 1% in the body. The rest stays in the gut, right? And so, but yet it lowers inflammation. So how does that work?
So here's what I believe is happening. So factors like curcumin or berberine, that people will say, I take berberine or I take curcumin and my inflammation went down in my knee arthritis, my C-reactive protein went down, my blood glucose went down, my blood sugar went down, all these apparent benefits. But as you point out, if you take 100 milligrams of curcumin, you poop out 99 plus milligrams, likewise berberine. How can it work then? So manufacturers and people who study this stuff have, as you point out, tried to force absorption by operin, piperine, nanoparticle emulsions, all these manipulations. And it does increase absorbability a little bit, but never shown to be improved in efficacy. Here's what I think is going on. If you have SIBO, as more than half the world does, and you take an antimicrobial, like curcumin or berberine, these are antimicrobials that kill off multiple species of bacteria. So if you take berberine, for instance, it kills off E. coli, Salmonella, Lactobacillus, Akkermansia, Faecalibacter. It kills off. It's an antibiotic essentially, and you get improvement. It's a therapeutic test that tells you had SIBO, or at least severe colonic dysbiosis. It's not because the berberine or curcumin got absorbed and somehow exerted beneficial effects on your pancreas or liver or muscle. It's because you killed off microbes that were overproliferated. So if you respond to those things, recognize you have SIBO or colonic dysbiosis, manage it, SIBO yogurt, fermented foods, stop the curcumin or berberine, because it's not a good idea to take an antibiotic for a prolonged period. We don't know what happens, but probably bad things happen. So if we know this, right? People who've taken, for instance, penicillin for years have their health destroyed by the prolonged course of penicillin. Does the same thing happen with the antibiotics in curcumin and berberine? Probably. No one's done those studies, but they're antimicrobials.
Yeah, and I tell my viewers, don't take the berberine for months and months. Some people were saying, "Hey, take it. It's going to help you." I say 3-4 months the most is my opinion, but you may think. What do you think about that? How long with berberine in particular?
As long as it is required. So I use a lot of berberine for fungal overgrowth. So if you had a stool, SIBO is easier to detect than fungal overgrowth because there's a breath test, there are signs for it. Fungal overgrowth is much trickier because there's no sign specific to fungal overgrowth unless you have lots of fungal infestations all throughout your body. That's kind of a hint that you have fungal overgrowth in the gastrointestinal tract. Excessive sugar cravings can be a sign, but there's nothing beyond that. So you have to rely on a stool test. Stool tests have limited usefulness because they're rectal tests. If you submit a stool sample, it's a rectal sample, right? It's not an ascending colon sample. It's not an ileum sample. It's not a duodenal sample. It's a rectal sample. Because we know, like my friend Dr. Raul Cano did this study, he sampled the microbiome in animals, duodenum, jejunum, ileum, ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon, all the different areas. And the microbiome is different at every location. It changes inch by inch. So you can only tell so much from a rectal sample. But how else can you do it? We're not going to do a colonoscope and try to get some ileal stool. So we're stuck with rectal sampling. But I point that out because if you see overproliferation of one or another species, including fungal species, where is it? Is it just in the rectum? Is it in the colon? Is it in the small bowel? You don't know. So we're left with that kind of uncertainty. But I use a lot of berberine for fungal overgrowth because it's a very effective antifungal. But what typically happens is people get very sick on it because, well, first of all, you kill fungi. It's very unpleasant. And then two, you don't just kill fungi. You kill all kinds of things. You kill beneficial species. You kill unhealthy species. And so as you point out, it's not a good thing to take for a long time. So I've only used it for as long as necessary to eliminate fungal species and maybe as a factor in eradicating SIBO. But you can do, because the SIBO yogurt is so darn effective and so benign and has so many benefits. And of course, it's not a drug. It's something you make in the comfort of your kitchen that looks and smells like yogurt. It's not yogurt, of course, right? But it looks and smells like yogurt, and you can have it with blueberries, and it has all these other incredible benefits. And so my first choice would be SIBO yogurt for SIBO, and then do such things as berberine for the fungal overgrowth if you must, because eradication of fungal overgrowth is a very unpleasant business, Victor.
Oh man, yeah. Which and you just you kind of touched on this here. Can you eat too much of the El Rotary yogurt? It's delicious, and I had it twice today.
Well, my rationale in saying no more than a half cup per day is not from overexposure to rotari. It's from overexposure to dairy. So we know that the more dairy you consume, the more likely you are to generate some adverse effects. And so that was my rationale. But it's a very soft cutoff, this half cup or 120 milliliters. But so if not having a problem, it's probably perfectly fine. Um, Now, by the way, we've never seen any evidence of overdosing on rotari. I have taken as much as 1 trillion. So there's 300 billion typically in a half cup serving when rotari is fermented by itself. Fewer when you ferment with other microbes. But I've taken as much as 1 trillion many times. I can't say I had any adverse effect, but nor did I get additional benefit.
Which I mean, that's the power of the fermenting the yogurt, right? Versus just taking the tablet. I mean, because it doubles so many times, you have so many, a therapeutic dose of it versus a couple, 10 billion maybe in a tablet versus hundreds of billions.
Exactly, Victor. We don't know how many microbes are necessary to kill off a SIBO, but it's probably a higher number than what we get in a probiotic capsule. So that's why I encourage people when they get the rotari probiotic, you can take the capsule, but if you have SIBO, consider making the yogurt and getting much higher counts.
And it's good. And it's, once that tell you the first time, I'm like, man, that's some tangy stuff. And then it's like, man, I can't wait to eat this again. So I love it. I love it.
Let me tell you about a new microbe we're playing with. It's
Oh,
called Lactobacillus crispatus, Crispatus. It's a vaginal microbe. So it's sourced from a human vagina, but many modern ladies, like rotari, our overexposure to antibiotics killed it off. We don't have it. Most people don't have it. Crispatus, many ladies, not all, but many ladies have lost it. It makes them more prone to vaginal infections, urinary tract infections, etc. So restoring crispatus can be very important for a woman's health. But once again, you buy it as a probiotic. But we don't know how many microbes are necessary. Most studies use 5 billion, but we don't know. We don't have, me and other microbiome people don't have the funding that the pharmaceutical industry does, because we don't rip people off for all kinds of money. You know how many drugs now cost $10,000 a month? We don't do that, right? So we don't have billion-dollar research budgets. So one of the big voids in microbiome research is what are called dose response studies. So if I gave you, let's say you had SIBO, I give you 10 billion, 20 billion, 50 billion, 100 billion, 5, and we see what is more effective. Well, that's very expensive to do for non-pharmaceuticals. So there's a big lack of knowledge in the microbiome world in the so-called dose response. So with the crispatus, we chose to do 5 or 10 billion. But if you think you need more because you're having a lot of vaginal or reproductive or urinary problems, make yogurt out of it. And interestingly, it's super delicious. It's the most delicious yogurt I've ever had. Very smooth and creamy. And we ferment it with rotari because there's a broader range of reproductive benefits when you do that. So that's a new microbe we've been playing with. It also has very impressive skin effects. But it's not clear to me, given what evidence we have, whether if a woman takes it orally, will it improve her skin? We're not sure. But if you apply it topically, it does. And so I'm not clear on whether oral consumption will lead to skin benefits. But a lot of ladies will take these yogurts, by the way, Victor, and apply them as masks. So 3 to 5 minutes, wash it off. And ladies are reporting some beneficial effects that way. But the crispatus is very interesting. And it may be important, evidence very preliminary, may be important for male prostate health.
Nice. Yeah, I was going to ask about the benefits for men, but there you go. You answered that. So Jane asks, what's the best resource for more recipes similar to Super Gut? Well, Dr. Davis has got a lot of recipes in the book Super Gut, and I'm sure you do on your site as well.
Yeah, so Supergut started the whole idea of cultivating human microbes. So if you want a healthier child at childbirth with better neurological maturation, make sure that child gets Bifidobacterium infantis. If you want better muscular recovery because you're in sports or other physically demanding activity, make sure you get Bacillus coagulans because it reduces muscle injury during strenuous activity. If you want better sleep, Reuteri. I'm a chronic insomniac, Victor. I now sleep like a baby with, or better, with the Reuteri. And here's an interesting observation. This, by the way, is our observations. No, there's nobody, no one's done research in this. This is all anecdotal observation. There's a product called Yakult, Yakult. It's a commercial product. It's kind of a crappy product because it's sugary and low fat, but it has a microbe called Lactobacillus casei Shirota strain. You can buy it in stores like Meijer, Target, Walmart, $3.99 or so, $2.99, $3.99 for some little plastic bottles. Well, we don't drink it because it's crap, but you want the microbe. 6 billion, I believe, in each little container. Ferment it just like we do the Reuteri, 36 hours, human body temperature. And this has been shown in formal studies to dramatically reduce the frequency of viral upper respiratory infections. And if you do have one, it cuts the duration in half. But it also causes deep sleep. I'm a chronic insomniac, Victor. I was taking Reuteri and KCI Shirota yogurt, so high counts. I was sleeping 12 hours a day. I had to stop it because I was sleeping too much. You know, you and I have things to do.
Right.
But we're learning all these new lessons by fermenting different microbes. Now, a lot of the newest things are not, I wrote the book, I don't know, 2, 3 years ago. So the newest things are in my blog, williamdavismd.com, in my membership website, innercircle.drdavisinfinitehealth.com. And so I try to make these things new findings because the world of the microbiome, Victor, is extremely dynamic. It's changing literally every day. It's kind of like AI. It's a new age of insight into health. So it's confusing, it's overwhelming at times, but if you kind of get a hold of it, you can experience dramatic effects. For instance, it's becoming clear multiple metabolic abnormalities, high uric acid and gout, high oxalates, high homocysteine. Victor, these are all conditions caused by disruption of the microbiome. You don't need drugs for these things. You need to address the microbiome. High T mayo is evidence of SIBO. It's not a problem with meat and animal product consumption. It's a dysbiotic SIBO condition because of the overproliferation of proteobacteria and Bacteroidetes. That's the problem. So the solution. So what's shocking, Victor, is how many conditions can now be addressed by managing the microbiome. It's going to change. Pharma will resist. Doctors will resist. And you know what? Doctors should be the champions of health. Sadly, I'm speaking generally, of course, most mainstream MDs are not. They're champions of pharmaceuticals, medical procedures, and generating revenues. Health be damned. Well, that's why what you're doing, you, other podcasters, other YouTubers, that's why what we're doing is so important because it's not coming from the healthcare system. It's not coming through these damn drug ads on TV. It's not coming from the doctor who works for the hospital systems. So it's got to come from you and me and other people.
Absolutely. That's what I say all the time. You know, if you're healthy, they lose a customer. So, you know, keeping you coming back for more medications keeps the pockets full. So, and I'm glad you brought up something about oxalates, and that's been just over the last year, it seems like it's been brought up a lot, and especially carnivore and keto, about how bad oxalates are and all this. And I'd love to know your opinion about this because I think it's junk myself, but I'd love to know your opinion.
Well, it's become clear, given the science, that a high level of oxalates is due to a loss of lactobacillus and bifidobacteria species, perhaps some other species like Oxalobacter. In other words, it's due to dysbiosis and more likely SIBO. So, so I think about this. So your great grandmother could eat all kinds of food. She could eat tomatoes and eggplants and nuts. She had no problems.
Mhm.
Modern people, they say things like, I can't eat 37 foods. There's a list of 7 foods I can eat. And if I eat outside that list, I get real sick. The problem is not the food. It's not the oxalates. It's not the FODMAPs. It's not the histamine-containing foods. It's none of those things. It's the distortion of the microbes. So, for instance, oxalates. All you have to do is restore lactobacillus species, bifidobacteria species, and the oxalates go down. Likewise, uric acid. Likewise, homocysteine. Likewise, T-male. All these boogeymen that have been come up over these are all that's why, but it also illustrates just how widespread this problem is, disruption of the gastrointestinal microbiome. And by the way, uh, we can't discuss it today, but there's also similar parallel disruptions of the vaginal microbiome, the prostate microbiome, the bladder microbiome, the oral microbiome, and other skin microbiome. So it's a new world, Victor. It's a little scary, a little challenging, maybe a little overwhelming, but it means we're going to have a ton of new ways to deal with all these common health conditions that do not involve pharmaceuticals.
Yep, that's what we need. We need less pharmaceuticals. Absolutely. Can this help someone with severe Crohn's after the majority of the colon has been removed? 2009, not on a bag at the moment, but after 30 plus surgeries, needs another.
Wow. You hopefully do these things before those kinds of things happen. So can't speak to that individual's specific situation. All you can do is try, right? So all you can do, so if someone develops Crohn's, which is a disease of the ileum primarily, inflammation of the ileum, that's the far end of the small intestine before the colon. Uh, it means you have SIBO and some other things. There may be genetic predisposition, some other things. But it means a big factor is SIBO because it involves the small intestine and it means severe inflammation. So it means even if you still had an intact colon and intact small intestine, it means plenty of work like the SIBO yogurt, fermented foods, all these things we try to do. But it's going to take years to undo and heal. And so, yes, you can try to do these things. You may have to do it more seriously than other people. You'll probably have to do it for the rest of your life. But the key here is do it before bad things like colon resection occur.
Hmm. Good point. Good point. I have 4 forms of lupus. Take plaquenil and a chemotherapy infusion of belimumab. Will this kill the benefits of the yogurt with all this? I don't know if you can.
Yeah, so 2 drugs this person is taking. Probably not, but here's the uncertainty. Let's say you're a drug company and you want to get your drug approved orally, intravenous, intramuscular, whatever, right? The FDA has never required microbiome analysis to see what the impact is. So we often don't know. We do know some drugs have effects on the microbiome. We know, for instance, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs have effects, PPIs and H2 blockers, stomach acid blocking drugs, birth control pills. We know that there's a handful of drugs, but the great majority of drugs, 99%, we don't know what the effect of that drug is on the microbiome. So we often just don't know. But even if it has adverse effects on things like the SIBO yogurt, there's no harm. In other words, if you take the SIBO yogurt, but you're taking something that kills some of the species, it doesn't harm you. And believe it or not, there's still modest benefit even when the microbes are killed. So research at MIT showed that if you kill rotari, for instance, some, not all, some of the benefits are maintained. So all is not lost if you're on these drugs. But my hope would be if you engage in all the things we do, no wheat, no grains, no sugars, factors like vitamin D, magnesium, iodine, and omega-3 fatty acids that synergize to minimize insulin resistance and inflammation and address the microbiome. My hope is that over time, it may take years, it pulls back the things driving the autoimmune process. So, for instance, consumption of the gliadin protein of wheat and related proteins and other grains, we know with good science is the initiating factor in many, if not most, autoimmune disease. Let me say that again. We know with good science, a lot of this done by Fasano and his group, while at University of Maryland, now at Harvard, they've shown that the gliadin protein of wheat and related proteins in other grains, secalin in rye, hordein in barley, zein in corn, these are all related proteins, are the initiating factors in autoimmunity. Why doesn't it get more publicity? Because it doesn't make a lot of money.
Mm.
So wheat grain eliminate, big factor. Vitamin D. Lack of vitamin D doesn't cause autoimmunity. It allows it to happen. So vitamin D, big player. Omega-3 fatty acids, a minor player, but it helps. Addressing the microbiome, especially SIBO, because the small intestine, recall, is very permeable, allowing those toxins like endotoxin enter the bloodstream. When fecal microbes enter the picture, it increases intestinal permeability. So you want to push back on the SIBO, the entry of fecal organisms in the small intestine. You know what's a lethal combination, Victor?
What?
Consumption of wheat with SIBO.
Hmm.
It's because you have wide open intestinal permeability and open door to autoimmune responses. But of course, in conventional medicine, they don't give a crap about that. They just say, oh, we're going to block TNF alpha. This one step. You might have liver damage from it. You might have TB from your suppressed immune response. And it's going to cost you $10,000 a month. But if you said to your doctor, well, what about the SIBO or the gliadin protein initiate? They say, oh, don't waste my time. Did you consult Dr. Google again?
Right. So man, I did a recipe that was like an oatmeal substitute, used, flaxseed, chia seeds, things like that as a substitute. And I got so much pushback from everybody saying oats are healthy. Oats are healthy. You can put them in the fridge. It'll cut down. It'll be a resistant starch. It'll do this and that. So I think you mentioned oats already, but would you just give me your opinion on oats?
Well, all somebody has to do. So those proteins I mentioned, the gliadin, secalin, hordein, zein, those are called prolamin proteins. There is one in oatmeal called avenin, but it's not as harmful. So oats got to pass on that basis. But here's the problem. If you did a blood glucose, one way to gauge the impact of a food on blood glucose is to simply do finger stick blood glucose before consumption, and then 30 to 60 minutes after the start of consumption, because you want to see the peak. People say, oh no, my doctor says check it after 2 hours. No, that's if you're on insulin to see if you get back to baseline. We want to know what the peak glucose is. And you consume, let's say, some stone ground organic oatmeal and skim milk with no added sugar. You'll see your blood glucose go from, say, 100 milligrams to 155. Now, when that happens, when you get a rise in blood glucose of that magnitude, it generates insulin resistance, expansion of abdominal fat, higher triglycerides, fatty liver, all that kind of stuff, and you glycate proteins. So every time blood glucose goes above 100 milligrams per deciliter, you glycate the proteins of your body, and that's an irreversible process. So for instance, collagen, the most plentiful protein in the body, it's in skin, it's in your arteries, it's in your joint cartilage. If you glycate collagen, which is very prone to glycation, collagen becomes brittle. In the skin, for instance, becomes brittle, it fragments, and then enzymes digest it, like matrix metalloproteinase, digest the collagen fragments. You get thinning of the skin, you get crepey skin, and deeper wrinkles. If you glycate the collagen in your joint cartilage, like your knees and hips, the joint cartilage becomes brittle, fragments, breaks down, gets reabsorbed, and over time you get bone-on-bone arthritis. So glycation is a very bad thing that accelerates the phenomenon of aging. So every time your blood glucose goes above 100 milligrams, as it would, say, with a bowl of oatmeal, you accelerate. Now, you won't feel it because it takes months to years for these effects to develop. That's why people say things like, oh, I eat oatmeal, I feel fine. Or I eat bread as a croissant or a bagel, I feel fine. Well, some people get sick, many do not, because a lot of the phenomena of these things are not perceived. Like when you consume the amylopectin A of wheat and grains, that's the carbohydrate unique to wheat and grains. You're going to glycate, because it turns to glucose, your proteins, but you won't be aware of it. You won't be aware of it until you have deep wrinkles on your skin, until you have bone-on-bone arthritis or joint pain from arthritis. You won't know it till you have cataracts and have to have your lenses removed. You won't know it till your doctor says, hey, something's wrong with your kidneys. You lost about 30% of your kidney function. You won't know that until it's tested. But you can blame a lot of this, not entirely, but a lot of this phenomena on glycation from excessive blood glucose.
Perfect. Thank you. Someone says, been eating Reuteri for about a week now. If I see an effect on my sleep, do you know how long it will take?
Oddly, about only half the people who consume Reuteri experience a sleep effect. I don't know why. That's an important question, by the way. Why the variation? Victor, we know a lot. There's so much we don't know. So the variation, for instance, in response to Reuteri, is it because some people already have it? Well, only about 1 in 25 people have Reuteri anymore. But that's one factor. Another would be variation in hormonal responses. So in mouse studies, for instance, oxytocin rises with Reuteri. Well, there's oxytocin receptor variants, genetically determined, that can determine. So one of my suspicions that I've shared with some of my colleagues is that people who have oxytocin receptor variants are more prone to narcissistic behavior. But we can't control those genetically determined receptor variants. And there may be other factors, such as, oddly, some of the endocannabinoid system responses. So there's a lot we know, there's a lot we don't know. So as far as we know, we've seen about half the people who get Reuteri will get better. I'm among them. I'm terrified. Victor, I'm terrified. If I have to stop Reuteri, I dread it because I know I'm not going to sleep. I'm going to be miserable. But only about half the people do that. This has never been described in a formal clinical study. This is our observation. Likewise, the Lactobacillus casei shirota, that observation of profound sleep, not everybody gets it. Or maybe only half the people get it. Why? Don't know. Is it some difference in melatonin metabolism? Is it some other neurotransmitter? We don't know. Very interesting questions. Our research has been mostly in body composition questions and skin effects, as well as musculature. We've not explored the sleep effects, but there's a ton of things. As I say, Victor, there's a lot we know. There's a ton we don't know. I wish I was 22 again, because just Reuteri alone would be a lifetime, a career's worth of investigation. So I'm 68, so I've got only a handful of years left to do these kinds of things. But we need to get these answers because there's such power. One of the most interesting effects I think about with Reuteri is the restoration of social and emotional responses. We're seeing people becoming friendlier, gentler, more accepting, more generous. And so that to me is among the most interesting of all. So in all our future clinical studies, whether it's from muscle or skin effects or immune, whatever, we're going to always do baseline and follow-up questionnaires on well-being. How happy are you with where you are in your life? How happy are you with what you've accomplished? How happy are you with your relationships? Because what I'm seeing is marked improvement in all those kinds of things, but we need to quantify it.
Yep. And that's, for me personally, it was probably 3 days, 4 days. I noticed, I'm like you. I wake up in the middle of the night. I have my best ideas. I'll wake up 2-3 times a night. I have to get up, write something down. And like I was waking up once a night. Sometimes I'd sleep through the night, which was, that was a rare thing for me for the longest time. So, but it took, 3-4 days at the most for me. But I'm sure, everybody's different, like I always say. So results may vary. 4 weeks post colonoscopy and 1 course antibiotics have given me a terrible gut. Anything I can do to return to normal? I'm always running to the loo. I don't eat grains, etc. Eating your yogurt.
Well, one of the things you want to do is tell the gastroenterologist when they next say, take this prep, Miralax, you say, nope, I'm not taking it. Because Miralax, ethylene glycol, antifreeze, is a very potent emulsifying agent. It dissolves the mucus barrier. Mucus is protective. If you didn't have mucus in your gastrointestinal tract, you would die within hours to days. It's extremely important. And the Miralax dissolves the mucus barrier for days. And what makes me cringe, Victor? It's often prescribed for constipation chronically. These people, their health goes to crap because it dissolves the mucus barrier. So one, never accept. You can use magnesium. That's a whole other conversation. But you can use magnesium, a natural osmotic effect. Pulls water into your gastrointestinal. It's very safe, does not disrupt the mucus barrier. So we can use various magnesium preparations as a very safe prep. Another thing is do all the things we do to restore microbes. The SIBO yogurt, fermented foods, fibers. If there's an antibiotic involved, think about making what I call Saccharomyces boulardii sparkling juice. So that's a fungus species. It's a cousin of Saccharomyces cerevisiae. That's the species used to make beer and wine. So we're going to use its cousin adapted to the human body, Saccharomyces boulardii. You can buy it as a probiotic. It's I'm blanking on the commercial name. You can get also kombuchas made with it. And by the way, you can, because there's more and more commercial products now made with microbes. You can, for instance, there's a product called Vital Life, Vitalife kombucha. It's not kombucha; it's labeled kombucha, but it's made with Bacillus subtilis. It's $2.19 at Aldi's if you have an Aldi's near you. You can
Yes.
use you can use that kombucha to make sparkling juices for $2.19. You can make it over and over and over and over, and never have to buy it again. You can do the same with Saccharomyces boulardii. You ferment it at room temperature. It's a room temperature fermenting microbe, typically for about 48 hours. Taste it. If it's still sweet, let it go another 12 to 24 hours. You don't want sugar. You want the microbes to consume the sugar. Leave the cap on very loosely or vent it every so often, because if you don't, so much carbon dioxide is produced. If it's capped tightly, it will explode literally in your kitchen. So you want to vent it. You can also go to beer brewing stores and buy vent caps that let the gas come off. But after 48 or so hours, you'll have a sparkling juice. So I use, for instance, mango passion fruit juice. Ferment it for 48 hours, you get mango passion fruit soda. It's delicious. And it's one of the most important things you can do to minimize, you can't prevent, but minimize the damage done to your gastrointestinal microbiome by an antibiotic. Consume maybe a quarter to half cup, couple, 3 times a day. And because it's a fungus, it's not susceptible to antibiotics.
Mhm. And like you said, it's going to consume the sugar in the juice for the most part. So, that part's null and void, right? As far as
Mm-hmm.
somebody's doing low carb,
Mm-hmm.
that's gonna do that, just like it does with lactose and milk with the Reuteri or the SIBO yogurt.
No, Victor, you raise an important question. So fermentation is a low carber's best friend because you can take foods that are high carb and convert them to low carb. It'll get rid of the carbs in salsa, for instance, or tomato sauce, or ketchup, or juices. And if you let it ferment long enough, you have close to zero carbs.
Yep, same with kombucha. I mean, you use sugar to feed that, but at the end of it is very, very low. I mean, you're gonna have a little bit of residual sugar, but not a lot if you do it right. So,
Mhm.
um, one thing I did want to ask you about before we wrap up here in a minute is, so the organic creams. I know in your 4-week protocol you say to watch out for this polysorbate 80 and things like that. So what a lot of the organic creams, the heavy creams, have been doing now is adding gellan gum. It's hard to find. I've got a raw milk dairy near me where I can get cream, but a lot of people don't. So what do you think about that? Or have you done any studies about that at all with gellan gum?
So the problems with the very potent emulsifiers like polysorbate 80 and carboxymethylcellulose is they, like Miralax, they dissolve your mucus barrier.
Mm.
It's like putting dishwashing soap in a greasy pan. You see the oils disperse immediately. That's what it does to your gastrointestinal tract. Now, there's a bunch of these thickening or semi-emulsifying agents like xanthan gum, gellan gum, carrageenan. No one's done the studies, Victor, unfortunately. Are they like polysorbate 80 and do they disperse the mucus barrier? No one's done that study. So we don't really know for a fact. I will tell you anecdotally, a lot of people who have avoided those thickening agents seem to get benefits from it, reduced inflammation primarily. Because if you're damaging mucus barrier, you're worsening endotoxemia. So by avoiding them, maybe, but that science just not fully done.
Yeah. And see, if I don't go to the raw milk dairy, I get the heavy cream from Aldi or Walmart. It's got carrageenan, which I did away with when I did this 4-week program, and I mean I feel great. So,
Great,
um,
great, Victor.
but I can't do the raw milk dairy all the time. So um, let's see. I had another. I want to ask you about this because just because we're here. Have you heard about the sugar fast or the sugar diet? Has that popped up on your radar at all?
If you mean people who consume a lot of sugar to kind of reset their metabolism, that you're talking about?
Yeah, they're doing basically low protein, low fat, and basically sugar for and dropping weight. I'm just wondering what you think about the long term effects of that.
So people are lulled by the fact that any kind of deprivation diet can lead to at least upfront weight loss, but you've done potentially irreparable damage to your microbiome and to your various organs. So, like that process of glycation, you're going to glycate like crazy. You can't undo glycation, sadly, Victor. If you caused the start of cataracts, or you glycated small LDL particles that cause heart disease, or if you glycated collagen in your skin and joints, you can't undo it. So, if you accelerated disease across a wide spectrum of conditions. And sugar also disrupts the microbiome. It encourages the proliferation of fecal microbes. And like we talked about earlier, it encourages proliferation of fungal species. So these people are causing unbelievable amounts of health problems. They might not experience it at first, but long term they will. It's a very unnatural. There's no such diet on this planet in wild living people. In other words, a lot of lessons can also be taken from what wild humans do. And they all consume root vegetables. They gather berries. People say things like, oh, the Inuits only eat meat. That's not true. They eat root vegetables and berries. They get the essential thing. Now, their microbiome may be partially adapted to a lower intake. That's another thing to factor in also. People who've followed some kind of unique indigenous diet may have a microbiome that evolved over centuries to accommodate that. You don't have centuries to
Right,
accommodate.
right. And one more sucralose. Someone asked about sucralose, and I thought initially, until I've experimented with myself, that it was okay. I read an old study and it was funded by the sugar industry, and so I'm like, it's probably junk. Well, and it was done in rats, and now since there have been human studies done, and so I'm kind of changing my mind on the sucralose. What are your thoughts on sucralose as a sweetener?
The evidence is uneven, but some of the best evidence from Israel looked at sucralose as well as aspartame and saccharin. And they observed dramatic distortions of the microbiome in animals, but also in humans. This was a very elegant study. And so I put that study at the top of the list as being the most reliable. And that showed that sucralose caused distortion of the microbiome in ways that mimicked or echoed the microbiome of obese type 2 diabetics. And when the microbiome of people who consume sucralose, let me put that way, when the microbiome of humans who consume sucralose was transferred to slender, healthy mice, they became fat and diabetic. So, pretty good evidence that there's something really wrong with those sweeteners. Now, I don't know why those three unrelated biochemically compounds have the same effect. There's something weird going on here, don't understand. But taking that evidence, sucralose seems like something we shouldn't be consuming.
Perfect. Well, Dr. Davis, where do we find you? I know you're on YouTube because I watch you all the time. Where else can we find you for more information?
So, yes, of course, YouTube. I have a podcast called Defiant Health Podcast. I have a very busy blog. It's called WilliamDavisMD.com. It's got several thousand posts on it. For people who like this kind of two-way conversation, I have a membership website, which has the very terribly awkward name of innercircle.drdavisinfinitehealth.com. And, of course, the books.
Yeah. And I have noticed in your videos you've got another book sitting up there that I'm not familiar with in the background. So you've got something else coming up?
Yeah, we did a clinical study in ladies in which I'm not supposed to talk about this because of regulatory concerns,
Nope,
but
you don't
showed
have to.
showed unexpected changes in shape and body composition. So I wrote a book about it, but it's not coming out till December, and it's got what I think is a really silly name, Super Body. But I was bullied by my publisher to use that title, so it's going to be called Super Body, coming out in December.
Perfect. Well, Dr. Davis, listen, thank you so much for being here, and I really appreciate the talk, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Thank you, Victor, and keep on doing what you're doing. It's a very needed service.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Davis. And we'll see y'all next week.